Glenn Hahn, and welcome back to the Tech Show. On the phone right now, we have a guest. His name is Jeff Horton. He's the author of the book, The Great Collapse. This is the first of 2 books in the Survivors of the Pulse series, and he has 2 unpublished books, The Dark Age and The Last Prophet. Also, he has a couple websites out there you may want to, quick and jump and take a look at while we're having our conversation tonight. The first one is www.hortonlibrary, HORGON, library.com. And he has some interesting stuff on that website, a trailer, interviews, reviews, etc. And his publisher's site is www.tatepublishing.com. He also has a Facebook fan page as well, and that can be accessed from his website. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here tonight. So tell me.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And I got to tell you, I've read the synopsis and I've read into your book and everything else, and I thought it was a very fascinating subject. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, The Great Collapse is the first in two book series, The Survivors of the Pulse, and basically it's all about what happens when the power goes out and never comes back on. The premise is that if it happened suddenly overnight, it would be pretty catastrophic. And in the case of of my book, the impact is actually global. So after the power goes out, they basically wake up the next morning, there's no power, and going forward, it never comes back on. So there's no communications, there's no television, there's nothing. Basically no cars, no airplanes. All the technology that relies on electronics is basically gone. The novel actually has a lot of, it's grounded in reality. There's a report from what was called the EMP Commission. It was done by Congress. It's called the Report of the Commission to Assess the Threat to the United States from Electromagnetic Pulse, EMP attack. It was in 2008. And basically they paint that's a little bit of a frightening picture about what would happen if a nuclear warhead was detonated over about, the middle of the country to the power grid.
For our listeners that are out there, let me just recap for a second. An EMP, electromagnetic pulse, is basically the bad part of a nuclear weapon. And basically it is a magnetic pulse that goes out and basically fries electronic components. Is that correct, Jeff?
Absolutely. It was, I think the first time it was actually discovered was back when they were doing testing out in, Nevada in the 1940s.
Back at the old Trinity site when they first measured the first EMP pulse given off the first bomb, I think it was.
Yeah, there's a lot of now in my novel. It's not a nuclear warhead. It's actually an EMP weapon. It's basically designed to knock out power. That's basically stolen and activated, and it coincides with a pretty nasty solar flare. And so I guess the fiction aspect of it is that the solar flare and the EMP interact in the Earth's magnetic field and prevent, it basically traps an EMP in the magnetic field. So they cannot, activate any electronics and can't go back and rebuild components that weren't active when the EMP hit. So there's basically nothing they can do.
So, girls, we have, by the way, Jeff, we have 2 girls in our studio tonight, Bailey and Sarah.
Oh, hello.
Hi. Hi.
And we were actually talking earlier today about how these two, how you girls would survive and how your life would be changed if the events in this novel actually came true. You would have no internet, you would have no TV, you would have nothing. And girls, what was the first things that came out of your mind, your mouth? What did you first say?
Horrible. Bad.
How would they, and that's, and you're talking about, 2 girls that all they know in their lives is technology.
Absolutely. I was doing book signings, and I had a teacher from Indiana actually was visiting someone in town, and she was telling me she thought the material would be great for education, for kids. You think about it. I mean, what would you do if the power went out in the morning? You came back, you woke up in the morning, and there was no power. Well, I mean, we have ice storms. I'm sure they're like that in Philly, and it's like that down here in the Carolinas. And knocks out power 2 or 3 days. And that's probably part of what got me thinking about this in the first place. And so what would happen if it didn't come back? I mean, there's nobody to come help because the power's out all over. It basically, you have to think about not just iPods and iPhones and television and cell phones and texting and the like, but you have to be concerned about things like water, plumbing. Food.
Basic human survival. I mean, when you have a storm, and the weatherman comes on the TV and says, we're going to have 28 inches. First thing people do is they run to the food store. they stock up on all these items, right? And but you always know that there's an end in sight. You know that in 2 days you're going to be out again, and life will go on. But what really fascinated me about your novel, okay, and the human condition and the human spirit was that there is no, wait 2 days and this will clear up.
Right.
This is a total lack of technology for the foreseeable part of the rest of these people's lives in this novel.
Yeah, I guess the thinking that I had was, I'm sure some will think, well, people did just fine, for tens of thousands of years, without electricity. But I think if you really look at it closely, we've never been where we are now. I mean, we're so intricately tied. Our whole culture, our society, everything is tied so much to technology that if we lost it, it would be such a shock to the system. And, people had 10,000 years or whatever to basically develop, ways of, safe eating habits, safe ways of dealing with water, digging the best wells. Communication was limited because of, geography, and until they developed ships and really started being able to branch out. But our culture, our society today is completely, built on reliance on technology. And, I guess part of what kind of prompted me to write this was a bit of a wake-up call. I mean, it's in that EMP report, they point out, that the infrastructure, for example, the components to rebuild a lot of the programmable logic controllers and technologies in our water supply, and it's in all of our infrastructure systems. It typically takes for some of those a year, under normal circumstances to get parts in, and there's less and less people who are able to respond. So I mean, it's kind of a bleak picture, but and I realized that after I got into the novel about a third of the way, or maybe not quite that far, that I don't want it to be a depressing novel. So the premise is kind of frightening, right?
Yeah, but it's also a good indication of the human condition, the human spirit too. I mean, you have to think to yourselves as a reader of the novel, if this happens to me, what would I be doing? You know what I mean? How would I survive, and how would I protect my family? I mean, quite frankly, I guess for me, the first thing I'd be doing is seeing if I can make fire. Get a couple sticks together and just start rubbing and go, okay, see if I can make fire. And I mean, wasn't that the whole course of the human evolution with wasn't fire the first really true technology that was discovered?
Yeah, I mean, and of course, that's something that is fundamental. Even if you were stuck out in the woods and you went camping out in the middle of the mountains somewhere and you were isolated and you got lost, and you wanted to drink some water, really the best thing to do if you don't have anything with you like chlorine tablets would be to boil the water. But some of the streams might be safe. I mean, if they're not fast-moving, if they're stagnant like lakes, you have a good chance of getting some type of a waterborne illness. So, I mean, absolutely. So without fire, you wouldn't be able to even to do that. Even digging wells, I did some research, and it's pretty. I mean, it's more than just digging a hole and enjoying the water. I mean, you have to do certain things to actually, you've got to, put some type of, gravel or rocks or something in the bottom. They use concrete a lot of times to line the well. You got to clean it every 6 months or so, depending on where you go and who you ask. But yeah, fire is fundamental, absolutely.
And then when you're talking earlier about technologies, where it takes like a year or two, if a water plant goes down, it just like flashed in my mind. Gee, in 1969 we landed man on the moon. I don't think we can do it today.
Yeah. Well, it may end up being a private enterprise, right? These guys at Virgin Galactic. I love watching it. It's fascinating stuff.
It is, that and the whole X Prize and so forth. What was truly also fascinating, and I wanted to touch into it in your book, was the heroes of the book, the scientists.
Uh-huh.
But it wasn't just the scientists that got together to try to work out the problems. There was another group that actually joined with them. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, basically, there's several different. The novel follows several different perspectives. One of them is basically there's a meeting of religious and scientific minds coming together to try and resolve some of the centuries-old conflict and animus that's existed between ever since Copernicus. I mean, you can kind of argue where exactly that started.
Galileo.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and there may be good reasons on both sides to be a bit distrustful, but it's there. So these guys are gathered together to actually try to talk about, hey, what can we do? Developing a really good mutual respect. Scientists, we're not going to mock, Christian viewpoints, and Christians are not going to scoff at science. It's going to be a mutual thing. So these guys are gathered together, in a conference when this EMP hits. So these guys are flown in from all over the world, and of course they get stuck. Then there's some other groups, including I follow the president. I follow a group of military folks in the military. So and I to a point I follow the terrorists. Or in the novel, the antagonist is the country who actually steals a weapon is Iran. Which, by the way, I can go on a tangent for just a second.
Yeah, certainly.
I think one of the other points that the novel highlights, perhaps the need for, is if only one nuclear warhead detonated over Kansas or over somewhere in the plains, was able to knock out the power grid for most of the country, it really makes a good case, perhaps, for a missile defense shield. And definitely hardening our infrastructures. There's few things that would damage our entire planet, or at least our country, in the event of an EMP attack. Certainly, a nuclear war, asteroid, comet, mass pandemic, those kind of things come to mind, but not many.
No, it's a sad that 25 years ago we were promised that we would have a quote-unquote nuclear shield around our country.
Right.
Then, unfortunately, sometimes I guess the politicians just gave it away.
Well, another one of the interesting things that I learned in the course of my research was that Iran actually has had an interest in EMP for quite some time. At least, I think, 10 or 15 years, if not longer. They've been looking at it. I think the former Soviet Union and the United States both had competing. The problem has been they haven't been able to develop the kind of, let me rephrase that, that we know of. They haven't been able to develop a weapon that was able to deliver as massive an EMP electromagnetic pulse as what you get from a nuclear warhead.
It's interesting. What was that project that's upstate New York that always used to appear on the news a lot, like 10, 15 years ago? Can't think of the name, but the U.S. Navy and the U.S. government are trying to develop an EMP pulse weapon system.
I don't know that I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, it was up in upstate New York. I can't think of it. It'll come to me at some point, unfortunately.
Yeah, it seemed like somebody at one of my book signings mentioned that, but I wasn't familiar what he was talking about. It must be the same thing.
Yeah, I just can't think of the name offhand on that one. But